Welcome to another book review. Thank you for joining us. Today we are talking about the Conspirators hierarchy, the story of the Committee of 300, written by Dr. John Coleman, who is a former intelligence agent for MI6. And in this book, he exposes the truth about the elites and organizations who control the world. That is at least the claim. We're going to do some amateur research to investigate the claims that he makes in this book and figure out if they are valid. And I'm a novice. I don't have any formal education when it comes to doing investigative research, but I once met an older man in a bookstore who went on to talk to me for about 30 minutes, really unprompted, to explain how if you want to know the truth, you have to read in between the lines of history books and come to your own conclusions. So we're going to be taking that approach today and coming to our own conclusions based off what we find. I looked at the data and using Manus asked it to read through this book and either corroborate or refute its claims. And Manus had a very biased, in my opinion, read through of the book. But there was one interesting source of critique of somebody who, I think their website was something about conspiracies, so you can kind of imagine the type of person who was probably writing it. And they were suspect of this book on account of the fact that it is listed on the CIA's website. Their speculation was that if it's listed on the CIA's website, then the CIA, who is a big target of critique and one of the organizations controlling our society, that it's just more disinformation to confuse the public. However, Coleman in this book actually says that one of the committee's strategies for disseminating disinformation or to hide what their strategies and plans are is to put it in plain sight and in that way avoid suspicion. There's 5 claims that I'm going to investigate today that Coleman makes in this book. The first of those being that the committee is trying to create a post-industrial world. He says, broadly, the anticipated counter program of the Club of Rome, which is one of the organizations in the Committee of 300 that he names a lot, that's a secret society, would, he goes on to say, would cover inventing and disseminating post-industrialization ideas in the United States, coupled with the spread of counterculture movements such as drugs, sex, hedonism, Satanism, witchcraft, and environmentalism. That's right, environmentalism is a whole cover-up operation to try and reduce the advancement of technology and industrialization in the world, according to Coleman. And by the way, I just started a Amazon affiliate program, so if you guys want to help this channel out and order this book, use the link down in the description, or whatever Amazon shopping you're doing, go ahead and use that affiliate link. It helps us out. By the way, this is from the CIA website, ccia.gov. You do have this book on their website. Make of that what you will. Environmentalism efforts, a cover-up to end industrialization and reduce the world's population. All right, here's our AI overview. We're going to start with that. The view that environmentalism is a cover-up to end industrialization and reduce the world's population is a frequently cited criticism in conspiracy theory, often stemming from concerns about the economic impacts of climate policies, such as degrowth, or as some argue, a non-binding UN resolution known as Agenda 21, which some believe is part of a plan for a one-world government. All right, let's see what types of the top sources that come up. We've got Earth Day. Naturally, I'm sure they're breaking the myth. PNAS, what is that? Human population reduction is not a quick fix. What are they talking about here? Large, growing, and over-consuming human population, especially the increasing influence, is rapidly eroding many of the Earth's natural ecosystems. We examined various scenarios for global human population change to the year 2100. Okay, let's see what their methods are, because that's what is most suspect from Coleman, is that the Committee of 300 has strategies for depopulating the Earth. Most published human demographic data are expressed as mortality and birth rates per 5-year age class, often with the first year of life provided separately. The most reliable age-specific mortality rates are reported by the World Health Organization under the auspices of the Who Choice Project. Okay, this is not talking about methods of reducing the population. This is talking about methods of how they came up with reduced populations. Coleman is quoting the Royal Institute of International Affairs. This is one of their top secret papers, and it says, having been failed by Christianity and with unemployment on every hand, those who have been without jobs for 5 years or more will turn away from the church and seek solace in drugs. That is, when full control of the drug trade must be completed in order that the governments of all countries who are under the jurisdiction will have a monopoly which we will control through supply. Drug bars will take care of the unruly and the discontent. Would-be revolutionaries will be turned into harmless addicts and no will of their own. Now let us consider another type of drug, still undiscovered, but probably just around the corner. A drug making people happy in situations where they would normally feel miserable. Is there anyone more miserable than a person who has sought and been unable to find work? Such a drug would be a blessing, but a blessing fraught with a grave social and political dangers. By making a harmless chemical euphoria feel freely available, a dictator could reconcile an entire population to a state of affairs to which self-respecting human beings ought not to be reconciled. The idea there is to reduce jobs to increase dependency on drugs. Makes sense because a lot of people get purpose from their work. And so if you have people who are lost of purpose, where are they going to find that sense of fulfillment, but through something artificial like a drug? Well, let's see. Is the Royal of International Affairs responsible for, I'll just say, drug culture in America? I'll make it very specific. First things that come up, Chatham House, Oxford Academic, U.S. Department of State, Rios Partners. Here we go. This one quotes the organization. And remember, this book was written in the early 90s, so we are seeing if the claims he made back then are still relevant to today. This doesn't seem in favor of drugs, so I don't know what you're talking about, Coleman. Later on in the book, he says a one world government and one unit monetary system under permanent, non-elected hereditary oligarchists who self-select from among their numbers in the form of a feudal system, as it was in the Middle Ages. In this one world entity, population will be limited by restrictions on the number of children per family, diseases, wars, famines, until 1 billion people who are useful to the ruling class in areas which will be strictly and clearly defined remain as the total world population. There will be no middle class, only rulers and servants. Is the middle class in America shrinking? Yes, the American middle class is shrinking. The share of U.S. adults living in middle-income households fell from 61% in 1971 to 51% in 2023. So that's 10% in about 50 years. The hollowing out means fewer people are in the middle, with a larger share moving into upper income tiers, but also a growing segment moving into lower income, indicating increased unequal financial polarization. Basically, what used to be a bell curve is now turning into a U curve. So this is, again, kind of a look into the future. Coleman says euthanasia for the terminally ill and the aged shall be compulsory.
What's the one problem right now that's not going to be around in 2070? The elderly and the disabled. Because we're just gonna kill them.
At least 4 billion useless eaters shall be eliminated by the year 2050 by means of limited wars, organized epidemics of fatal rapid-acting diseases and starvation. Energy, food, and water shall be kept in subsistence levels for the non-elite, starting with the white population of Western Europe and North America, and then spreading to other races. The population of Canada, Western Europe, and the United States will be decimated more rapidly than on other continents, until the world's population reaches a manageable level of 1 billion, of which 500 million will consist of Chinese and Japanese races, selected because they are people who have been regimented for centuries and who are accustomed to obeying authority without question. So that's a very specific claim. Those of you who are research-oriented, you're probably upset that I'm not using your preferred method, but we're just trying to do a quick and dirty here to analyze. Is the population going to be 1 billion in 2050? I already came up with it. No, the global population is not projected to be 1 billion in 2050. It is expected to reach approximately 9.7 to 9.8 billion by that year. The population is growing though the pace is slowing, with the estimates suggesting it could peak around 10.4 billion in the 2080s. So unless something dramatic happens, that's what we're on course looking at. So his biggest critique in this book is definitely of the banks. For instance, here he says nothing happens in Wall Street that is not controlled by the Bank of England, specifically the Bank of England, I guess. He tackles pretty much every single bank in the world, but he does cite England and the royal family and all the some 100 families in England who are the ones who are controlling everything, with the Queen when she was alive being enemy number one by the Bank of England. No, Wall Street is not controlled by the Bank of England. Wall Street is primarily regulated by U.S. federal agencies like the SEC and operates under U.S. law. The Bank of England is a nationalized central bank focused on the UK economy, while the Federal Reserve manages U.S. monetary policy. Okay, so see, clearly nothing suspicious going on there? This one is very popular right now in this current hour with the war going on in Gaza and people asking questions and being critical of Israel. You know, one of the committee's strategies is to continue to build up the cult of Christian fundamentalism begun by the British East India Company's servant Darby, which will be misused to strengthen the Zionist state of Israel through identifying with the Jews through the myth of God's chosen people and by donating very substantial amounts of money to what they mistakenly believe is a religious cause in the furtherance of Christianity. East India Company, Darby. However, records from 1857... So based on your request, there is no widely recognized historical link between a prominent figure named Darby and the East India Company. However, records from 1857 mention a Dr. Darby of the 10th Ode Irregular Infantry whose family was connected to the East India Company's China establishment. What does the East India Company have to do with Israel? Based on the current 2026 data, the East India Company has no direct historical or modern connection to the state of Israel. Instead, modern India-Israel relations are defined by a robust, multi-billion-dollar strategic military and economic partnership, with India being a top buyer of Israeli defense equipment and a key partner to trade, technology, and agriculture. Well, you missed again, Coleman, but that's pretty interesting too. So, led us down an interesting path. Coleman also says that the State Department has a layer of agents in the right wing posing as fearless anti-Semitic fighters. There are 4 leaders in this group of informers, 3 of whom are discreet Jewish homosexuals. This spy group has been in operation for the past 2 decades. They publish virulently anti-Jewish newspapers and sell a wide variety of anti-Semitic books. One of the principal operators works out of Louisiana. A member of this group is a writer who is dearly beloved in Christian right-wing circles. The group and the individuals who go to make it up are under the protection of the ADL, Jewish homosexuals responsible for publishing anti-Semitic writings. Based on available research, there is no evidence to support the claim that Jewish homosexuals are responsible for publishing anti-Semitic writings. And I don't even know what anti-Semitic means, so... An anti-Semite is a person who harbors prejudice, hostility, or hatred towards Jews as an ethnic, religious, or cultural group. This discrimination can manifest through negative stereotypes, conspiracy theories, alleged control of finance/media, verbal or physical attacks, and the denial of the Jewish people's right to self-determination. That's not good. He says the Club of Rome has succeeded in splitting the Christian churches. It has succeeded in building up an army of charismatics, fundamentalists, and evangelicals who will fight for the Zionist state of Israel. During the Gulf War of Genocide, I received scores of letters asking me how I could oppose a just Christian war against Iraq. How could I doubt that Christian fundamentalist support for the Committee of 300's war against Iraq was not biblical? After all, didn't Billy Graham pray with President Bush just before the shooting started? These letters give an insight into just how well the Tavistock Institute has done its work. The Christian fundamentalist will be a formidable force behind the state of Israel, exactly as planned. How sad that these fine people do not realize that they have been grossly misused by the Club of Rome and that their opinions and beliefs are not their own, but those created for them by the hundreds of the Committee of 300. In other words, like any other segment of the United States population, the Christian fundamentalists and evangelicals have been thoroughly brainwashed. How does the Club of Rome interact with the Club of Rome interacts with the Catholic Church primarily through shared advocacy on environmental sustainability, climate change, and human-centric development, notably finding alignment with Pope Francis' encyclicals? I've never seen that word before. This relationship highlights a mutual focus on addressing the problematic of global crises, with the club's research of planetary limits reinforcing the church's message of stewardship. So they've got a shared agenda, supposedly, ideological alignment, policy influence. Nothing suspicious there. So the ADL, also known as the Anti-Defamation League, his claim is they're one of the Committee of 300's organizations who control our society. And he says their purpose is a joint FBI British intelligence operation designed to single out right-wing groups and their leaders and put them out of business before they grow too large and too influential. Does the ADL target right-wing influencers? Yes, the Anti-Defamation League documents and targets right-wing influencers, particularly those it identifies as spreading anti-Semitism, white supremacist propaganda, or extremist rhetoric. This has led to intense backlash from conservative figures, including Elon Musk, who accused the organization of targeting, harassing, and hating conservatives and Christians. Listen, can't we all just love each other? Can't we all just be kind to one another? So here he's talking about Mossad, who is a Israeli intelligence agency similar to the CIA or MI6. And he says they have tremendous advantage over other intelligence services in that every country in the world has a large Jewish community. Is Mossad the best intelligence agency in the world? Mossad is widely considered one of the world's most elite, daring, and effective intelligence agencies, renowned for precision, innovation, and deep penetration in Middle Eastern affairs. While often ranked in the top 5 globally, whether it is the best is subjective compared to agencies like CIA, larger, more extensive global reach. Interesting. Moving on to claim number 3. It's like a top 5 video. Top 5 conspiratorial claims in Dr. John Coleman's Conspirators hierarchy. I'm not on any drugs right now, I'm just on a lot of caffeine. So the third claim that Dr. Coleman puts out there throughout his book is one of brainwashing from elite organizations to try and control the masses. One of the quotes he has here has to do with education in the Club of Rome, saying that thanks to their technology, potential has dropped below that of Japan and Germany, in reference to America, nations we are supposed to have defeated in the Second World War. How has this come about? Because of men like Dr. Alexander King and our blindfolded state of mind, we have failed to recognize the destruction of our educational institutions and systems of teaching. As a result of our blindness, we are no longer training engineers and scientists in sufficient number to keep us among the industrialized nations of the world. How does the United States, compare with Japan and Germany in education? The United States generally underperforms in K through 12 math and science compared to Japan and Germany, with lower rankings in PISA assessments, while Japan focuses on high-stakes testing, uniformity, and group learning, and Germany uses a vocational-focused tracking system. The US system is more decentralized, flexible, and places greater emphasis on individual critical thinking. Must not be that critical if we're underperforming. I'm just saying. And this quote here saying there are three distinct phases in the response and reaction to stress displayed by large social groups. First, there is superficiality. The population under attack will defend itself with slogans. This does not identify the source of the crisis and therefore does nothing to address it. Hence, the crisis will persist. The second is fragmentation. This occurs as the crisis continues and social orders break down. Then there is the third phase where the population group goes into self-realization and turns away from the induced crisis, and there follows a maladaptive response, accompanied with active synaptic idealism and dissociation. And I think we have a really good current day example of that between George Floyd, Alex Preddy, Charlie Kirk, incidents and responses by the public. I'm not saying that those situations are equal, but the response and the way that the media engineered narratives around them and groups have been formed and activated, you see that pattern there of the high stress incident and fragmentation of the country, and then kind of just a malaise of people after the hype dies down. And this is just my opinion here, but as outraged as people will get over anything that happens in this country, we still live in such extreme comfort and will continue to do so because everything is more than likely controlled, whether it's the Committee of 300 or somebody else, that it would take some serious food and water supply shortages for there to necessitate moving people to act on their convictions and not just being a display of social conformity. That's my opinion. Kuro, what do you think? So this part I found really interesting because Coleman starts bringing in the Beatles specifically. He kind of ropes in every rock group, the Rolling Stones and whatnot. And what he has to say about the Beatles is that their song "With a Little Help from Their Friends" is code words for using drugs and making it cool. New styles, the new styles that the Beatles brought in were intended to upset the older generation and bring about that fragmentation, maladaptation process that I was just talking about. He claims that a guy named Theo Adorno was the one who basically engineered the Beatles. He claims that Adorno was kicked out of Germany by Hitler because of his cult of Dionysus music experiments. He was moved to England by the Oppenheimers, where the British royal family gave him facilities. It was here that Adorno perfected Beatle music, rock, punk rock, heavy metal rock, and all of the decadent clamor that passes for music today. It is worthy of note that the name The Beatles was chosen to show a connection between modern rock, the Isis cult, and the scarab beetle, a religion symbol of ancient Egypt, behind the Beatles. No, Theo Adorno was not behind the Beatles. This is a baseless conspiracy theory, notably pushed by Brazilian self-taught philosopher Olavo de Carvalho, suggesting Adorno wrote their songs. In reality, Adorno was a fierce critic of popular culture and held a deep disdain for the music and cultural impact of the Beatles. So I guess that's a discredited claim. All right, claim number 4 we're going to here is that the Committee of 300, one of their efforts, similar to brainwashing, is to bring about the moral decay of the society. So one of the goals here of the Committee of 300 in creating moral decay is that divorce draws no stigma, suicide is at an all-time high and raises few eyebrows, social deviation from the norm and sexual aberrations, once unmentionable in decent circles, are now commonplace and excite no special protest. And I mean, that's kind of self-evident. I don't even need to research that one, because you just look at what was acceptable in the 1950s versus what they put on, cable programming today, and there's a night and day difference. He mentions later in the book that it would be really easy for the DEA to track down and eliminate the production of heroin, saying that simply keeping a check on all factories making acetic anhydride, the most essential chemical component needed by laboratories to refine heroin from raw opium. If the DEA were to do that work, that they could stop a majority of the production of the drug. Why doesn't the DEA track acetic anhydride? The U.S. Drug Enforcement DEA does track that, listing it as a less 2 chemical under the Controlled Substances Act because it is a primary precursor used to produce heroin. However, the effectiveness of this tracking is limited by several factors, leading to perceptions that it is underregulated, particularly regarding diversion from legal industrial use. Okay, so there's a legal use of it, so that creates investigating it limited, and that makes sense. His claim in a lot of the portion of this book about the drug enforcement is that they let a lot of stuff go under the radar and are actually part of the drug cartels to push the stuff out, because it's, again, one of the strategies of the Committee of 300. But clearly, the internet is telling me that that's not the case. And maybe they read this book and they took a note. This is again talking about marriage. It says, marriage will be outlawed and there shall be no family life. Children will be removed from their parents at an early age and brought up by wards as state property. Such as experiment was carried out in East Germany under Erich Honecker, when children were taken away from parents considered by the state to be disloyal citizens. Women will be degraded through the continued process of women's liberation movements. Free sex shall be mandatory. Were children removed from parents in East Germany by... Yes, children were forcibly removed from their parents in East Germany, particularly targeting families deemed politically undesirable. These actions were often part of the policy of forced adoption aimed at punishing parents who attempted to flee to the West, were considered political dissidents, or were otherwise deemed unfit by the socialist state. We have one accredited claim, one accredited quote by the internet here. All right, another quote on the topic of moral decay. Coleman says, an unprecedented assault on moral values will go into high gear in 1992. Pornography will no longer be called pornography, but adult sex entertainment. Sloganeering will take the form of why hide it when everybody does it. Let's take away the image that public displays of sex are ugly and dirty. No more will those who care for this type of unbridled sexual lust have to go to seedy porno parlors. Instead, the upper class, supper clubs and places favored by the rich and famous will make public sexual displays a highly artistic form of entertainment. Worse yet, some church leaders will even recommend it. Again, some of that is on the surface, you can see how movies have gotten more lewd over the years. There being straight up pornography in some films. But I want to see, because he's, again, talking from the early 90s, so pornography addiction today compared to 1991 when this book came out. Pornography addiction has shifted from a niche, largely unstudied behavior in 1991 to a widely recognized, high-prevalence public health concern today, driven by the internet's AAA engine, accessibility, affordability, and anonymity. While in 1991, pornography consumption was primarily limited to physical media, magazines, rentals, today's landscape involves 24/7 on-demand and often free access via smartphones, leading to a much higher volume of consumption and a rise in self-reported compulsive behaviors. So clearly, it is evident that particular quote is correct. All right, claim, last one. We're going to number 5. And this is his claim on the committee's goal to erase the West as we know it. He says, our forebears spoke a common language and believed in common religion, Christianity, and held common ideals. There were no aliens in our midst that came later in a deliberately planned attempt to break up the United States into a series of fragmented nationalities, cultures, and beliefs. If you doubt this, go down to the east side of New York or the west side of Los Angeles on any given Saturday and look around you. The United States has become several nations struggling to coexist under a common system of government. When the floodgates of immigration were opened wide by Franklin D. Roosevelt, a cousin of the head of the Committee of 300, the cultural shock caused great confusion and dislocation and made one nation an unworkable concept. The Club of Rome and NATO have exacerbated the situation. Love thy neighbor is an ideal that will not work unless your neighbor is as yourself. And following, he says that each individual in the future shall be indoctrinated to understand that he or she is totally dependent upon the state for survival. Private gun ownership will have become a thing of the past in the United States by the year 2010. All right, this one we can definitely fact check. Does private gun ownership still exist in the US? Yes, private gun ownership not only exists in the United States, but it is at historically high levels with an estimated 393 to 500 million firearms in civilian hands as of 2023. Roughly 30 to 32% of American adults personally own a gun, and about 40 to 44% of households have at least one. So, Coleman, you missed. You missed on that prediction. The committee is the only organized power hierarchy in the world, transcending all governments and individuals. And that's pretty crazy to think about, because if we look up, is the committee of 300 real? What do we find? See the CIA, I see the Wikipedia page. Look, AI won't even tell me. It means they don't exist. The internet's not telling me they're there. They don't exist. So yeah, those are the 5 big claims that he makes throughout this book, and at least that I observed. You can take a look at every single paragraph. Probably has a million different rabbit holes that you can go down. I'm just not oriented in that way to be able to really take a in-depth research dive to analyze all of that. But I did want to cover some of what I thought were interesting name drops, who he claims are part of the Committee of 300, such as Warren Buffett, George Bush, Winston Churchill, the DuPont family, Queen Elizabeth, II, Aldous Huxley, Henry Kissinger. He talks a lot about Henry Kissinger in this book. The Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the Vanderbilts, the H.G. Wells, the guy who wrote War of the Worlds, and other famous science fiction books. So there's a lot of investigating and analyzing of all that you can probably do that I don't really have the capacity for, and I'm not worried. I'm just reviewing this book. I think if you are fearful about anything going on in the world, then you should put your faith in Jesus, because no matter what happens, there is eternal security there. And it's almost guaranteed that as long as things are the way that they are, we're fighting an uphill battle. But with Jesus, you have already won the battle. You've won the war, rather. And so the circumstances that we're put in, it's a matrix. We live in a matrix, and the red pill is Jesus. Thanks, Kuro. So if you enjoyed this, let me know. Give a like, give a comment. Let me know if there's any other books that you want me to check out and review. Be happy to do a different type of format, always trying to change it up, make it interesting, have fun, and not take even conspiracy theories like this too seriously, yet also giving them a fair chance. And nothing should be hidden, no question should be unbreachable, unapproachable. We should be able to have dialogues on whatever we see fit and let the truth rise to the top. Or confusion will be guaranteed to reign, and conformity and uniformity will be authorized. So keep asking questions. Don't be intimidated by other people or afraid of what others think. By asking questions, if they are, that should point you that there is some fire, because where there's smoke, there's fire. All right. I think that's all I gotta say.